Hey everyone, in this video we're gonna be learning the following typical themes for the King's Indian defense. How to play against the f4 setup, how to hard counter the London system by delaying knight f6, how to play against pretty random opening moves, what to avoid when going for the typical kingside play, and at the end of the video we will be taking down the bishop e3 line. Okay, we're getting a game, having the black pieces, and this is gonna be the King's Indian raiding climb. Meet d4 with bishop to g7, and against knight c3 I have in mind to play something connected with c6 and d5, which could lead to some pawn structures that are actually typical to the Karo Khan. And yeah, this is pretty much so-called the Gurgenidze system, which I think is actually very interesting and could be also very helpful for the ones that have watched the Karo Khan rating climb, the previous one that we did. So opponent plays f4, like I expect this a lot to happen in your games. I don't really expect them to go for the central play with d4. I expect a lot of, like, let's say knight f3 slash knight c3 kind of sideline. So I'm just gonna continue with the fianchetto and we take it from there. Against knight f3 I think we're kind of supposed to play c5 and go back into the Sicilian defense, which is some kind of a Grand Prix variation or like the close Sicilian, but I think I'm gonna try to keep it very typical for this and just play c6 and d5 against this as well. I don't think this is like the best way to handle it because we're gonna have some problems with the g7 bishop in case he goes e5, but it's keeping a pawn structure that I think we're gonna see quite a lot in the series, so that's why I went for c6 and d5. Opponent plays d3 though, which is also not a bad move, just staying very flexible pretty much. And it gives me the option to take and play queen takes on d1. Even though that is doable, it's not an amazing endgame. It's actually pretty interesting for white with c3, bishop c2 ideas, and this bishop is kind of problematic. Okay, actually an annoying move for my opponent could be queen b6, and it's gonna be pretty weird because you're not supposed to develop your queen in the early phase of the game. But first of all, we're hitting the pawn on b2. And second of all, we're stopping him from castling, and I think this is pretty awkward for him to meet, so plays knight c3, which is actually a good move, hitting the pawn on d5 for the second time. Taking on c3 could perhaps be interesting, even though giving up your fianchetto bishop is almost never a good idea. Like, you should do this only if you're like really sure it's good, and the idea would be to go d4 and try to make an argument that he's got weak pawns. And in this position, honestly, I think we might have to go for bishop takes on c3 because, for example, I don't see an easy way to play like knight f6 defending the pawn, as he can go e5, and maybe against that we have knight g4, but d4, and like my pieces are like really stacked, so I think this is actually pretty clever to do, although it's a bit of an anti-positional move. Like, you have to do this only if you kind of know what you're doing. So he's got like pretty bad pawns. That's my main argument. King is still in the center. We're developing now and attacking the e4 pawn. He just plays bishop d2, which is not super logical. We can just take that, and threatening mate in one is always nice, so hoping we can get it. Yeah, he just plays g3 and we can get the mate in one, and with that we do get the first game in. This position I think should be even, by the way. I can turn on the analysis mode and we can have a look together. I think taking on c3 was appropriate there. Okay, I mean, computer likes knight h6, which is pretty interesting. I'm wondering how bad was bishop takes. I considered it as interesting. Maybe like a stronger engine would agree on this. Okay, I mean, he's supposed to play probably e5. Knight e4, queen d4 or something, yeah, like this. This is what he was supposed to do. And okay, I mean, playing this position where he's got the messed up structure, and you know, okay, I mean, if I take on d4, he obviously takes with a pawn. What I'm trying to say, playing this position without having the fianchetto bishop is not really that big of a problem because I'm not gonna be getting checkmated, which is like generally the main issue with playing moves such as this one. So if he has to play like e5 and then go queen d4, I think generally we're pretty safe here, despite the computer giving white a small edge. I think this should be pretty playable after the queen trade. So okay, I mean, you can play the endgame apparently and do knight a6. Not sure I'm actually loving this. Like, I was thinking he'd play like c3, but maybe the knight is pretty good there. Okay, this is still not not like an easy position to play as black. Can easily get outplayed. Like if they play e5, this bishop is pretty bad. So these endgames are generally pretty dangerous. So I would try to stay away from them. Okay, we're getting the black pieces. Against d4, I think we're gonna still open up with g6. Just giving him the option to just grab the center and can go for bishop g7 and so on. And we do face the London system, which is like pretty interesting. So what I wanted to say is that when we're facing, let's say, like the c4 main lines, I'm gonna play with bishop g7, knight c3, and then I think I'm just gonna be transposing back into like the normal King's Indian. Even though I looked up at some sidelines, I think it might be most instructive to just play the sort of pure King's Indian. So against the London though, this move further with g6 is actually pretty good against the London, because you have a lot of interesting options to counter their normal plans. Because it's pretty useful that we have not developed this knight, because we'll be able to play f5 first and then knight f6. But this is not how it starts. We are supposed to go d6 and then play knight d7 e5. Once we get that one in, then we can think about playing with f5 and just try to get like a sort of improved version of the King's Indian pretty much. Because like if you think about it, in the King's Indian, you all the time have to play this this way. You castle and then you have to move the f6 knight so you can push e5 and then f5. So how nice would it be to like have f5 directly and save you 10 piece? That's kind of what we are playing for here. But against d5, that's not really a critical move. My opponent, I guess, was trying to play the Jubava London, but he went d5. Because this move is not really achieving anything. Plus, it's opening up the monster from g7. So I think against this, the most clever way to do it is just go something like c6. Even though developing with knight f6 was fine. I think this will hurt him the most, combined with queen b6 hitting the pawn. And against dc, it's like an interesting scenario, because you can take either way. Taking with the pawn is also fine, strengthening your center, but I think we prioritize development here and just take with a knight, because we could potentially also use the c file for the rook. Let's say after we somehow develop this bishop somewhere, maybe even like d7 and rook c8, could potentially be using that file for the rook. It's just that this way we're developing a little bit faster. So I'm gonna play z3, pretty typical for the London. I'm considering to play queen b6 still and hit the pawn on b2. What kind of bothers me is that he can go knight d5 and I can't really grab on b2 because of knight c7, although maybe that's a thing because I have king d8. And if they take the rook, then we have queen takes on a1, winning back the rook, so it's even material, but his knight is trapped in the corner. So I think maybe we can try to play that. Queen b6 though, he can also play rook b1. What do we do against rook b1? Okay, let's do queen b6. I have a pretty funny idea. Against rook b1, I think we could potentially even try to sack the queen. I think it's like leading to pretty interesting play. It's like super unnecessary, but it does look very fun. Okay, opponent just plays bishop c4. I guess just taking the pawn on b2 is leading to a completely winning position. Could also consider queen b4, hitting both the c4 bishop and the c3 knight at once, making it like impossible for him to defend both. I mean, maybe he still has queen d3 there, so just taking the free pawn. No need to overthink here too much. And when he moves the knight, we collect the a1 rook, because you have to remember the bishop is activating, and yeah, I think he's just pretty much lost now. We can still go for the previous line with knight d5. We can take on a1 and then knight c7, but his knight will get trapped in the corner, so it's not really saving. And could take the free rook, could play queen b4, hitting everything. I guess we're gonna be taking the rook first of all because it's the more valuable piece, and second of all because we're forcing a trade of queens. And yeah, generally when you're up material, trading pieces will just make it easier to convert. So that's pretty much what we're doing here. Now that we're up a rook, we'll try to exchange all the pieces and get into an endgame where, you know, we have an extra rook, which will be much easier to convert compared to some situations where, let's say, like opponent has some kind of weird counterplay thanks to queens being on the board, and maybe could sacrifice a piece and force a perpetual. It's a way more likely scenario when there are queens on the board. So without them, it's gonna be really kind of impossible for opponent to come back from this kind of situation. So yeah, just defending my f7 pawn because knight g5 was creating a threat. And as long as we can dodge that, I think we should be good to go. Just finishing development. Bishop d7, rook c8 coming on the next move. Gonna be using the open file. When it plays knight e4, this knight is like really vulnerable to like some kind of a fork. It's not quite working yet, but definitely something that you want to keep in mind. Just figure out I have no time, so we'll have to speed up a bit with this one. Not really gonna be big issue to win this one with 90 seconds. I'm more concerned about the fact that we'll be getting less commentary, but since we're already like upper rook, I'm hoping we don't really need to go super in depth with this. Could have played knight d4 as well. That was even more stylish than winning on b5 with check, but I'm just kind of on autopilot. Maybe I should actually speed up a bit and not be so casual, but I think we're gonna get this one in time. Yeah, winning another piece. Need to use some pre-moves. I know it's gonna get confusing for some of you watching, which I try to avoid at most, but we kind of have to rely on these things when being so down on the clock. Just gonna be trading rooks, taking pawn on h2, taking back on e5. Oh, he didn't take. That was kind of strange. Anyways, getting my knight to e3 should be good. I just need to create a pass pawn, get a queen, and it's gonna be an easy mate. I'm just gonna get a 1 to like d5. Just push it. We're just like pushing the baby. Get the rook to c2 so we create the mating net. That's the cleanest, and we can get a queen with a checkmate, which is pretty nice. So managed to get this game in. Hope I didn't went too fast there with the moves, but it was like pretty straightforward with the extra rook. So I actually like to start with g6 for many reasons. The one of them is that, well, against d4, honestly, we could start knight f6. We're just avoiding the Trompowski, if you think about it this way, which is not like a huge problem, but it's a nice perk of playing this way. Plus, against d4, if you're going g6, against London system, we have ideas to play with like d6 and then knight d7, e5, let's say, and you know, we could go maybe f5 directly, maybe some knight h6, some like tricky lines with f5. These are generally very annoying for the London players. I mean, in my course, this is not really a problem, as if I'm remembering this right, we're playing something connected with e4. Yeah, I think we're doing like this, and then I'm recommending e4, and against e5 I just take and do something positional like this, and like knight e2, bishop e2. I mean, actually I play knight e2 to defend the pawn, and then we do it like this, and bishop e2, short castle, a4, a5, queen c2. Just positional stuff. What's gonna be in my course, but like most people don't really play with e4 against the King's Indian, so they'll play like e3 and you get very good version of the London. That's one of the perks of playing with g6. And the g6 move order, I'm pretty much mainly using it against e4, but I can play it against anything, you know. So the point is that against e4, I'm not playing like the normal Pirk or like the normal King's Indian, if you like to call it this way. I like to go for c6 and then d5, try to set up the Gurgenidze system, which is pretty interesting because let's say there are lines like h3 where we'll actually take, and we're getting a pawn structure that is very similar to what we've seen in the Caro-Kann in the Tartakova line. So I mean, for those of you that watched it, it might be pretty interesting to add this little opening to your repertoire, because we do get some like similar ideas to the Caro-Kann, but we also keep, I think, more winning chances, despite the fact that playing g6 it's riskier because we're giving them more space in the center. Obviously, we're getting the black pieces. When it opens up with e3, we're gonna do the same Fianchero setup, and we're pretty much gonna take it from there. So against this kind of lines, I think we're just gonna play the sort of typical King's Indian fashion. I mean, honestly, if I want to be more aggressive, I could just go like d6 and then f5 and get some kind of an improved Dutch. But I think just for the sake of simplicity, I'm gonna do it this way, and then I'm gonna read out the knight just because it's like more typical for the King's Indian, let's say. How do I want to play this? I think I develop the knight to c6 and then waiting for him to castle short so I can start attacking. Okay, he's pushing in the center. If he would have castled, the plan was to play knight e8 and then f5, just trying to advance the pawns. I guess d4 though, this is really tempting me to open up the position, as I think I'm kind of ahead in development a bit because he played a lot of like moves on the side and pushed pawns kind of slow. So taking on d4 is definitely very appealing. Could also consider bishop g4, but I think this is definitely the most straightforward way to play. And now I think he was supposed to take with a knight because the check is now pretty annoying. And against bishop e3, I think potentially knight g4 could be very strong, exploiting the pin and yeah, threatening knight takes on e3 next. He goes for a castle, which is nice. I mean, he's losing only a pawn after rook takes on e3. We have a funny variation where we can take with a rook and then take with a knight on e3. And we will win back the exchange, but we trade some more pieces. But I'm not sure we need to play that. Maybe we do. Like, I'm thinking knight e3, pawn takes, rook takes, knight d5 could be a little bit annoying because I have to move back. So for this reason, I'm gonna go rook takes e3 just to avoid opponent's counterplay. Cashing in the pawn, gonna be winning back the rook next, and I think we are a pawn without much compensation. So as I was saying, we could take that. But now after queen e1, which is attacking the knight, we get a pretty interesting opportunity to grab on c2, and that's gonna be creating a new fork. So this means we're gonna be winning the rook, but we also managed to grab another pawn in the process. So this is why this is better. And yeah, taking the rook on next move. Okay, opponent plays queen d2. Could cash in the exchange. Could also play knight takes on d4 with very good compensation, but of course, just cashing in the exchange is the simplest and the way to go. And after rook takes on a1, I'm thinking about finishing development. So we need to get these guys into the game. So I could do bishop d7 or bishop f5. What I like even better, I mean, bishop e6 is not really a move because of d5 and I get forked. But what I like even better is bishop g4. Because we're not only developing, but also winning a tempo. Because we're threatening to take and then pawn on d4 remains undefended. So that's why I think bishop g4 is the best move. Opponent plays queen g5. This is interesting. I could definitely trade queens and take pawn on d4. I could take on f3 because I'm forcing queen takes on d8. That might be the easiest win. I think I'm just gonna be taking on f3. However, I'm giving him like the pretty active bishop, which I'm not like a huge fan of. I think it doesn't really matter that much, to be honest, but just for sake of trading pieces, I'm gonna take on f3. He has to go for the intermezzo, and yeah, by the way, I could have also taken on d4 with check on the previous move. Maybe that was like even better, but I thought this should be good enough. And I like knight takes on d4 because on bishop b7, we have rook b8 and we're winning the pawn on b2. So I've seen that in advance and we're just up 2 pawns. I mean, actually, we're going to be up 3 pawns. So this is just completely winning despite having like the opposite colored bishops. So yeah, rook b1. I think here we get a very nice tactic with knight e2, deflecting the knight. Because if he takes, the rook drops, and if he doesn't take, I was about to say we can just collect his knight and also defend the rook in the process. Because taking with the knight would have dropped the rook, so that's why it was important to take there with the bishop. So now, after knight e2, just take back, but collecting the exchange is obviously better. And gonna go rook a1, collecting the pawn on a3. There's no way for him to defend it. And yeah, this is just gonna be a very easy win. We're just gonna be pushing the pawns or taking the hanging pieces, and then we're gonna get a new queen. Keep taking free stuff, of course. Rook f2 next, and I think you can actually start playing for some kind of a mating net with h5. King f2, it's gonna be pretty close to a mating net, I think. So could do g5. Yeah, just g5 and then Think we'll try to set up the pawn checkmate. Yeah. Let's hope he plays a6 and we get the pawn checkmate. That would be like pretty funny. I think he'll go a6. Oh, never mind. He plays g4. Not allowing the pawn checkmate. What a pity. We can still try to play for it though with f5. Oh, never mind. It's not gonna be a checkmate. Bishop d8 was kind of a dumb move. But just gonna go rook e2. Okay, why am I struggling to find a checkmate? That is pretty strange. But okay, now bishop e5, and I guess it's gonna be a quick mate. Yeah, rook h2 is unstoppable. Almost stalemate. He has a move though. That was calculated, and just gonna be taking pawn next, and king has no move, so we managed to get this one in. Getting the black pieces. Opponent opens up with knight f3. Gonna be going for g6 against anything pretty much. And we see a pretty exotic knight g5 move. I wonder what's that about. Just gonna keep developing. Playing knight f6 and getting ourselves castle. He plays e4. Let's just do d6. I think he could also castle. That's like very, very fine. e5 is not really a problem, but I'm gonna start with d6. Opponent plays bishop c4, which is hitting the f7 square, but we're just in time with castling short, so that's not really an issue. I wonder whether he's gonna take on f7 or not, because that's what a lot of beginners tend to do, giving up the two minors for the rook. But obviously the two minors in such an early phase of the game are gonna be stronger than the rook, because the rook really needs open files in order to be effective, which is why the rook could be better in the endgames actually, if there's enough room for maneuvering. The opponent plays knight d5, which is not a great move because it's moving the same piece twice in the opening. He already broke that rule twice by playing knight g5 and knight e5, and I think I'm just gonna go knight takes on d5, which is I think a fine move because he's forced to take with the pawn and he gets the double pawn. But we're also setting up a small trick in case he takes with a bishop, because we can play e6 and then hitting the knight and also the bishop just winning a piece. He takes with a pawn. Gonna go e5 anyways. That's like a nice move to get in, and also hitting the knight. This is like the typical King's Indian move. Plays d3, defending the knight. We would like to push f5, but a typical idea in the King's Indian that you should try to avoid is whenever they can play knight f3 jumping to g5 and then to e6. So even with the knight on f3, you are most of the time supposed to start with h6. So imagine now that it's already there, f5 knight e6 should like never really be allowed. Even though maybe here it's not that bad, but as a general rule, you should try to avoid that. Because in this position, honestly, even after knight e6, I think we're better after queen e7 and d6 d5. But you should just get started right and avoid most of this shenanigans that you can easily get rid of by playing h6, and they have to go back, and now you just get your typical King's Indian play, f5. I mean, just going for the typical King's Indian play and planning to get myself developed. It's not like I'm gonna go f4 g5 and push like a madman. Maybe we could do that, but I think also it's nice to bring some pieces. Could bring this knight over to f6. It's pretty weird that opponents are, I don't know, like really castling, so I find that pretty odd, to be honest. But I guess it's the way it goes around here. So could actually open up the position with e4, hitting the rook and planning to take on d3 with rook e8. But I would like to actually stay away from that. I'm gonna be playing this though slower with knight f6 and just try to get a more like instructive game. Hopefully go e4 and try to get an attack on the king side. Taking on d4 was definitely doable. I'm just hoping he'll go short castle and I'll manage to show the typical King's Indian play. But it really looks like opponent doesn't really plan to castle very soon. Just gonna go e3. This is pretty annoying for them. Could even support a pawn with f4 next. In this position, a6 b5 is doable, but I don't really see what you really achieve with it, as you can play bishop b3. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely okay since our position is so good already. But thing is, white is generally pushing on this side of the board. Like, this is where white is focusing, and as a King's Indian player, you're kinda just looking to do a lot of dirty stuff on the king side. So, as a rule of thumb, maybe sometimes you could do these moves if you need them, but if you don't, I think generally it's better to just focus on the king side play. So, opponent plays knight f1. Gotta speed up because I only have 27 seconds left. Gonna be going f4, supporting the pawns. I think it's just a nightmare for my opponent to develop right now. And g3, that's fine. I'm just gonna go g5, support the pawns. Just taking back. Could even play knight h5, queen h4. It's actually a very annoying idea for my opponent. I'm actually gonna go for that because I don't have much time, so going for cheap tricks might be required, but the position is definitely crashing, so you can play this in many ways and still do all right. I think already he's supposed to take on e3 just so he's not getting mated immediately, but he's still lost, obviously, so just the queen h4 is a huge flat. And you see that this is a pretty typical game for this rating range because opponent has a lot of random moves on the board. Like his moves are just like not really mixing well together, and you should try to pretty much have a plan and try to set up a goal and focus on it, because if you're just moving your pieces left and right aimlessly, it's not gonna be the most effective strategy generally. Even though maybe you can sometimes get away with it, it doesn't mean you're doing the right thing. Wait, wouldn't just resigned. That's like pretty funny. I wasn't really expecting it, but I guess he might have figured out this is authorized speedrun account, so he just sort of gave up, trying to flag me and ruin the ruin the content. Getting the black pieces. Your opponent opens up with e4. You're gonna go for the fianchetto, and pretty interesting to see that a 500 rated player goes for d4, occupying the center, which is what you should be doing. I don't really expect a lot of them to be doing that though. I think you're very likely to run into like a lot of, let's say, bishop c4, queen f3, or all kinds of cheap tricks or strange moves in the opening. But let's see how this one plays out. So he goes bishop e3. This is not like that common because you're supposed to start with developing one of the knights, but it's still interesting. We're gonna go c6 and d5. This is generally gonna be the idea that we're using when they're playing with e4 and d4. Just gonna go d5 now. Okay, opponent takes on d5, just gonna be taking with a pawn. And we're getting a pawn structure that is actually very similar to what we've seen in the Karo-kan. It's just that this bishop is on g7. But it could be interesting because we have ideas to actually develop the knight instead of f6 like it's in the Karo-kan. Could go knight h6, knight f5 if I could draw any arrows. And the knight might be even more active than it would have been on f6. But opponent plays knight e5. Again, breaking the opening principle because he's moving the same piece twice without having finished development. But this is not that bad yet. So I think you can just develop with knight c6. And yeah, I mean, bishop b5 probably interesting for him, but just bishop d7 is doable. I'm guessing he'll take, which is nice for us because we got even better control over the center now and potentially be using the b file for the rook. Yeah, I mean, I could keep it simple with knight f6 and castle. Could go for like an interesting plan of going f6 e5, but generally that's not really, it could definitely backfire. That's what I'm trying to say. So I think I'm just gonna keep it very, very simple, and I'm gonna get myself castled. Yes, just going short, and position should still be maybe very slightly better for black. Still very fighting game. Thinking about playing rook b8 in this position. I'm not like huge fan of rushing with bishop f5, as bishop is actually not that useful there, as c2 is not really that big of a target. And an idea that I like more would be something to trade off the bishop in this fashion, but not sure we need to rush with that. Also thinking about knight e7 and breaking with e5. Could start rook b8, that's also true. Hitting the pawn, forcing b3. I've got definitely an interesting choice. But I think maybe we could do... Okay, let's do it this way. So rook b8, b3, and I'm planning to go c5. dc and then e5. Just try to play it in sort of a gambit fashion. Okay, he goes knight a4. That's interesting. It's actually not a bad move. It's pretty typical for the structure, aiming to play knight c5. So generally the answer for that is knight e4. Controlling this square. And knight is pretty active. If we can provoke f3, I mean, that's pretty nice for us, as it's weakening e3 square and also many squares around the king. You can just play like knight d6 and knight f5 maybe. If he plays knight c5, I can obviously just trade and we are having a winning position. Bishop g4 could definitely trade, which I said before I like, but maybe even better is to just play f5. Attack the bishop, support the knight, create ideas of pushing f4. Bishop f3 is a good move, but now thinking of f4, probably has to go back all the way to c1, and then maybe could do g5. Could also play e5 in this position, is not a bad move. I think I like f4, it just feels really good to push his pieces back. And on bishop c1, perhaps rook b4 is a strong move now, hitting both the knight and the d4 pawn. Yeah, that's actually just crashing. I mean, he has c3 though that I missed. And then he's also hitting the rook and defending the knight. But I mean, we have many ideas there. It's not really that big of a problem. Okay, so he takes, which is something I'm glad to see. I think we're just gonna be taking back. Has to still move the bishop and have ideas to play f3. And after g3, we actually have a huge mating idea with queen to d7 and queen coming over to h3, which is gonna be like pretty hard to stop. Let's hope we can get that. Hope he plays g3, because if he allows taking on g2, his king is gonna be really weak. And now I'm aiming to go there. King h1 only move, but this might actually end up being a very instructive checkmate. After queen there and rook f5, rook takes on h2. I mean queen h2 and rook h5. Yeah, unfortunately he just plays that. But now he's getting mated immediately. Hope he still plays king h1 and we could do like rook f5, rook g1, queen h2, checkmate on the board. That's very instructive. Okay, let's just go rook f5. I'm still like hoping he'll go for king h1 and we can get this smothered mate, but probably not gonna happen. So we'll have to mate him on g2. Could actually show that idea in the post-game analysis, but wishing we could get it on the board, it's even more satisfying. Okay, I mean, I guess we're just gonna mate him on g2. So the idea that I was trying to highlight was if he plays king h1, we have queen h3, threatening mate in 1, so this is 4. And then we could go rook f5. And this is a huge threat. Like, for example, if he does nothing, this comes over. And this is a very typical checkmate. This is what you have to do. A lot of puzzles, you just get a pattern recognitions, and you just do this automatically without already calculating. And let's say even if he tries queen f1, trying to get rid of my queen, this doesn't help us. Go to rook h5 and only move queen h3, but can take it with a checkmate because the rook is defended by the bishop. This would have not helped for my opponent. Thanks a lot for making it this far into the video, and in case you're looking for more episodes from the same series, make sure to click one of the videos that will appear on the screen. So with that being said, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I'll see you around on the channel. Take care.